Hello everyone. Welcome to the lecture series for dynamic topics in sociology. The aim of this series is to enable you to tackle the dynamic topics in sociology and the question of how to use current affairs in sociological answer writing and the question of how to answer the supposedly GS type questions in sociology. The topic that I'll be covering in this lecture would be the dynamic aspect of kinship, family, marriage, and gender. And the issues that I will be covering in this lecture would be emerging forms of family, the various diversity of families, and the issues related to same-sex couples, LGBT community, transgender, and I'll be also critiquing the transgender and surrogacy bills which have been passed recently, and then I'll be looking at the issues of new reproductive technologies. This lecture has turned out to be quite long, beyond my expectations. Like it's little over than 1 hour, but be patient. Do watch it completely. You'll find very valuable stuff in it, and the most importantly is that I have covered it theoretically, so that you will be able to critically analyze all these issues by yourself. So I am actually not providing you with the fish, but teaching you how to fish. So yes, please do watch it, and also join our Telegram channel. Like we are engaged in quite a healthy discussion related to sociology topics there, and you can also suggest me what other dynamic topics that you are facing problems with, that I'll be so that I can make videos on those topics. So check the link in the description section. Yes. So let's begin. Okay, then let us start with the question of emerging forms of family, diversity of families, and continuity and change in the structures of family. This question can be analyzed from the angle of form and substance of family. Form is how the family looks, and the substance is what the family does. So the dominant view of society, the hegemonic view of society, the hegemonic or dominant sections of society, plus states fixation with the form of heteronormative and procreative family. Heteronormative means heterosexual being the norm, and procreative, that the logic of biology, that family is to procreate, to produce more children. The dominant view is fixated with this form of one size fit all family. And sometimes this fixation with this form leads to losing the substance of family. And substance of family is what family does. That is economic and emotional dependency. Dependencies like feeding, nurturing, companionship, and support at the times of birth, marriage, death, and financial hardships. And this one size fit all formula actually ignores and negates the diversity of families or households that are found in modern society. What this diversity includes, these are single person households. Single person households are actually, by numbers, it's 12.5% of all the households in India. Then there are lone parent households. Then there are hijra communities. Then there are live-in relationships, same-sex couples, gay, lesbians, and LGBTQ community. So this one size fits all heteronormative procreative family ignores these aspects, which leads to losing the substance of family. So this leads to negation of many rights of these sections of society. These are marriage and family rights, gender identity and expression, and matter of choice. And these are no small rights. The marriage and family rights entails your economic and emotional support system, and the politico-jural support system. For example, the cases of domestic, what sort of recourse people who are in same-sex couples, when they sort of have that falling out scenario, do they have normal protections that heterosexual couple have in the form of maintenance, in the form of domestic protection from Domestic Violence Act? And what about their property rights? Because people who come out with their sexuality, with their sexual orientation to their biological families, most often than not, they are, or many a times, they are abandoned, they are disowned. So this raises the issue of rights to equality, freedom, life, and issues of social exclusion. Equality, because right to equality, because they're not treated, because their arrangements, their domestic arrangements are not treated equally with the heteronormative arrangements, the protections, the legal protections that arrangement has. And this also raises the question on the so-called immutability of blood ties, because such LGBTQ people are disowned by their biological families, biological families. So the question of immutability of blood ties, on the foundation of which the structures of kinship, of descent and marriage are based, that it raises huge question on that. And then what about the matter of choice? The domestic arrangements of LGBTQ people, Hijra people, transgender people are not given legal recognition, and their biological families disown them. So they are left to fend for themselves. They are left in lurch. So this raises lots of humanitarian issues. And this also then brings us, so fixation with the norm, but still there is no denying that substance, the functional need of some sort of domestic arrangement is still there, or because of economic and emotional dependencies. So Robert K. Merton's corrective of functional alternatives come into play here, that diverse alternatives of the so-called nuclear family, heteronormative nuclear family, should be explored, so that the substance, the functions of the institution of family can be fulfilled in diverse ways. To understand this issue better, we have to look at the theories of structure of kinship. So, we will look at the classic literature of anthropology, which is also called the formalist school. What all thinkers come under this school? These are A.R. Radcliffe Brown, Malinowski, Mayer Fortes, and even Claude Levi-Strauss. They come under the formalist school. The formalist school tries to find the basis for these so-called permanent relations. And this school, the conception of structure of kinship is built around biology, the blood ties, the descent, the procreative family. In this conception, they have been made clear distinction between biological and nature on one side, social and culture on other side. And in this conception, social and cultural has been subordinated to biological or nature aspect, because these are built around the blood ties, the descent. And these structures are structures of marriage and descent. So you might remember all those diagrams with that triangle and those circles and the vertical uh, arrangement with the lines and the equal to sign representing siblings or representing marriages. These are all from the British school, like Malinowski and A. Radcliffe Brown. They have analyzed kinship structures through descent. But then came Levi-Strauss. So Levi-Strauss, what Levi-Strauss does is that he brings about the question of culture. That what British school has done is that they have only analyzed the relations which are natural, the blood ties, and so the way the rules of marriage are defined in different society, they are actually part of culture because these are not given in nature. These are built around alliances, marriage alliances. Through that, Levi Strauss gives the alliance theory of kinship. Like you might have come across this line from Hindi movies or something like कि बाकी सारे रिश्ते तो भगवान बनाता है लाइक यू नो माँ बेटा बाप टाइप वाले रिश्ते दिस इज द ओनली वन पवित्र रिश्ता ऑफ हस्बैंड एंड वाइफ जो इंसान खुद बनाता है सो इन दीज लाइंस they try to portray like some element of choice is there, but is there any real choice available in this traditional rules of marriage? Because according to alliance theory of Levi Strauss, the main the cornerstone of alliance theory is incest taboo, like the partners, the people which are forbidden for you to have marriage ties or sexual ties with. And there are also some positive prospective people which are seen as desirable as partners. So these then give us rules of both endogamy and exogamy. Exogamy is defined by incest taboo, and endogamy is defined by the desirable partners that should be chosen as prospective spouses. Through this, the rule of hypergamy also comes, and the element of choice is really debatable because of the issues like from this alliance theory only. The issues like honor killings and love jihad comes because of the rule of hypergamy, which is maintained that a girl from low status should go to higher status. If a girl from higher status goes towards the family of low status, that raises the issues which might lead to honor killing or the matter of love jihad, which is seen in news these days. So even Levi Strauss's conception of culture subordinates culture to nature, biological aspects of procreation, blood, and descent. So this gives us conception of kinship structure which is built around heteronormative and procreative families, and this gives the kinship structure a sort of rigidity. So it is because of this rigidity that kinship studies started to lose their sheen, like their academic vigor or curiosity, uh, during middle of the 20th century, and it was becoming a very big challenge for anthropology as a discipline because kinship studies were seen as central or cornerstone of this anthropology discipline in itself. And please do not be shocked about me mentioning anthropology here because in India, social anthropology and sociology are almost indistinguishable. However, challenge to this formalist school did came from different quarters. The first has been from Pierre Bourdieu. That you might remember Bourdieu from Cultural Capital, Symbolic Capital. So he talks about that there are actually two kinds of kinship, or he characterizes kinships into two types. One, he talks about official kinship, official kinship which actually formal school talks about, like the real blood relations and relations from alliances, and these relations actually come out, to give you example, in Indian scene, these relations, the official kinship is very very well symbolized in our marriage ceremonies. See, all the rituals and rules observed during marriage, they very meticulously symbolize the official kinship. Like for example, hierarchy of ladke wala and ladki wali, it is symbolized all through the marriage procession. There are various symbols, you must know it in various ceremonies, and all those like hierarchy of like taya, chacha, fufa, jija, and all those things. So these are official kinship. And the other aspect, interestingly, Bourdieu talks about is practical kinship. He talks that this is a kinship of every day, the strategies that people employ to get things done in their everyday life. For example, you must have heard these phrases like "तू मेरा भाई है," or like "सुबह हो गई मामू," और "परे हट जाता हूँ," और "काम करवाने के लिए गधे को भी बाप बनाना पड़ता है." Jokes apart, practical kinship also comes into play in the scenario of friends like family. Like we have friends which we treat like families. This friends like family aspect also attains salience in today's India because we are experiencing a lot of generation gap between our parental generation and our generation, and this is due to various factors like this LPG reforms and the possibility of physical and social mobility, given by LPG reforms and modern occupations. So many people like who originate from small towns or villages are now employed in millennial cities like Bangalore, Gurgaon, and they then live in bachelor households, and they are almost like uh, those friends are like families, and they sort of also lose contact, psychological contact with their parents, because they are not able to like share whatever they do with in their independent lives. Like modern occupation has also given economic independence, so they become very comparatively less answerable to their families, like blood families, like otherwise patriarchy and all, like in the earlier days when your occupation used to be dependent upon your father, so there was great amount of control. Now that is loosening up, so this practical kinship aspect is gaining salience. So this is leading to the scenario that we should be looking at other forms of kinship or other conceptions of kinship beyond the formal school of kinship, which gives importance only to ties by blood or ties by marriage. Covering Bourdieu, now this brings us to a person who revolutionized kinship studies after the formal school. This gentleman is David Schneider. He gave the cultural account of kinship. He looked at kinship as practice as against structure, very coming closer to Bourdieu's conception of practical kinship. Through cultural account, he tried to uncover the meaning of kinship rather than formal properties or formal rules of kinship. So he's looking at how the meanings of biology are created in culture. While doing that, he is giving precedence of culture over nature. This approach is also called social construction approach. In this approach, Schneider actually tries to bring about the meaning of biology through the lens of culture, because he's trying to understand what kinship practices actually mean. For example, even the Hindu in the Hindu society, the Hindu metaphor of seed and earth that is used, like seed is used for male sperm, and the earth is used for like womb of the mother. So in this conception, like taking the example of agriculture, like you sow any seed on earth, the 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 plant which will come about, the crop which will come about, will depend upon the seed. If you sow wheat, you will get wheat. If you sow rice, you will get paddy, right? So taking into cultural account or perspective of social construction, that every aspect of our reality is socially constructed, culturally constructed. So seed and earth metaphor actually aids in the institution of patrilineal succession, because using seed and earth metaphor, the bodily substance of the progeny of the son or daughter, mainly son, is established through male line. That the mother was just the field, it was like earth, and uh, that son doesn't derive identity from mother but from the seed that is of father. So, like we saw that this brings about the social construction of biology or biological and nature aspect. That even nature, the so-called nature or biological, the conceptions of blood, that what blood ties or what descent means, is all culturally constructed. This approach is also called deconstructivist approach, like that you are deconstructing what has been given to you already in culture. Like for example, we deconstructed seed and earth metaphor, because for people from the cultural right, who are very overzealous and emotionally attached to their culture, they take seed and earth metaphor as almost scientific facts. They will even argue that this is an ancient sort of science, that it is superior to our present or present science. So yeah, so this deconstructivist approach, if you remember, is unfolding the third layer of truth. If you remember, the first layer of truth was unfolded by the positivist when they see only the social facts, thing like things, and the second layer was unveiled about the sociological truth by the Versatile approach, the empathetic approach, right? And the third layer, which is the reflexive sociology, which tries to, deconstruct the structures of oppression. So this is the deconstructivist approach. And comparing it with the formalist school, in formalist school, the distinction there was like a clear distinction made between biological and social, or nature and culture, but precedence was given to biological, that whatever cultural or whatever social is defined by the biological characteristics of like procreation and blood. What Schneider did was that he gave it a flip. He gave precedence to culture over nature. That even the conception of nature, conception of biological, conception of what constitutes blood is culturally constructed. So what this did was this led to blurring of boundaries of biological and social in kinship, and setting up a degree of permeability between them. So this new conception of kinship, which David Schneider gave through his book American Kinship: A Cultural Account in 1970s, gave a new lease of life to kinship studies. This, as I mentioned earlier, the field of kinship studies became dormant because of stagnancy of formal school. It gave new life, lease of life. The most famous proponent which took this perspective forward is of Janet Carston, Carston, Janet Carston. She abandons the term kinship and chooses to chooses the term relatedness. So she gives this cultural account as culture of relatedness, and this has been explored by her in her ethnography Heat of the Hearth. Hearth mane kitchen. Heat of the Hearth. It has been carried out in a village in Malaysia called Langkawi. In that ethnography, she notes that how the conception of blood and shared substance, shared and the bodily substance is actually conceived in the form of people who eat food from common kitchen, common hearth, share the same blood. It seems very logical as well because blood, whatever we eat, gets transformed into blood. So if we eat common food, so we share a common blood. So people eating from same kitchen are considered as brothers and sisters. In this uh, ethnography, she also demonstrates that there is nothing of this sort like that immutability of like real blood ties, that those are immutable. So in this ethnography, she demonstrates that people who go to city and the practical aspect, the practical kinship aspect becomes dormant, so their ties also get severed. So, so this shows that actually the conceptions of blood are also culturally constructed. And another case can also be given here, like for example, Indian case of village exogamy. Like all the village people are treated as brothers and sisters, kin and kin groups. People are also referred to each other in the kin names like cha cha ta tau and other things like pare hat cha tau and all. Right? Yeah. So So the cultural account actually blurred the lines between nature and culture, biological and social. So this separation between biological and social has been rendered even more difficult to maintain with coming up of new reproductive technologies, DNA mapping, gene therapy. For example, the technique of amniocentesis can make you abort a child, a less developed child who is expected to uh, 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 take birth with mental retarded sort of conditions. They are aborted, and interface of technology, for example, like female feticides and all. So now the culture, like the culture of patriarchy has been been sort of intermingled with the biological and technological. So these things are adding more choice in the domain of nature. Like also, like issues of like designer babies, like gene therapy, DNA mapping, and like you can choose what sort of genes you want to reflect in your baby. This raises lots of like sociological and moral questions. What about this that these techniques only rich will be able to avail, and this will create like physical appearance differences between rich and poor. Okay, and now I'm going to give a quote, actual quote from another researcher, sociologist, M. Stathern, Stather. You should probably write it because it is useful. So here it goes. Quotes begin. The more nature is assisted by technology, and more the social recognition of parenthood is circumscribed by legislation, the more difficult it becomes to think of nature as independent of social intervention. So, the questions of parenthood that are also defined by legislation, because what sort of couples you are recognizing, what sort of people can marry each other. For example, if you look at it's part of the current issue, the special marriage act, it sort of makes it very very difficult for people from different faiths, like in India's special case, if one of them, one of that couple, one of those person happens to be a Muslim, so it becomes very, very difficult. The process of Special Marriage Act, like you have to put a notice like 1 month in advance, so that whoever has the objection with it can, come up with it. And that's why, like people sort of, it happens with this with, Islam cases, that people convert just for the sake of marriage. And now, like the statement by Yogi and Khattar, that they are going to even ban these sorts of conversions. So, like legislation is also, sort of circumscribing the prospective parenthood, which is supposedly biological, and cultural is, like circumscribing that. And then aspect of technology, and technology is very, 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 very cultural phenomena, because I am going to read a quote from Martin Heidegger. He's a philosopher and sociologist. It reads, "The essence of technology is by no means anything technological." That means that technology is not neutral. Like Marxist says that technology is actually used to subjugate workers, to make them more powerless and other things. Yeah. So now this thing has clearly been brought about by the social constructionism approach, the social construction approach, that conceptions of biological are actually circumscribed by culture. So when in our today's culture, the predominant values are of individualism, humanism, human rights, and matters of choice, then why should, like state should, propagate or promote only one size fits all sort of families? you know like even you can critique even Parsons in Nuclear Family here, because he says that nuclear family, the heterosexual, heteronormative nuclear family, is most fit to modern society because it aids in choice. But then, like, what about LGBTQ people? What about transgender people? What about Hijra people? Right? So actually, this choice element, which is dominant value of our age, along with individualism, humanism, and human rights, should lead to a vision of family based on recognizing functional aspects of family, functional as in the substance part, at beginning of our lecture. The functional aspects of family rather than their form, that is, what family do rather than what families look like. So this should enable in maintaining the flexibility of what constitutes family. This should lead to diversity of, institutions of family, not one single size fits all. This should lead to families of choice. This is the keyword. Chosen families, families of choice. Yes. So this cultural account of kinship and the element of social constructionism that it espouses has also opened up interesting dimensions for feminist scholars, who then argue that even this issue of gender binary is also socially constructed formulation. It's not given in nature, it's not given in biology. So they contend that the conceptions of masculine or feminine have no relationship with biology, but these are cultural traits which children are indoctrinated into by socialization processes. This then also opens up issues of matters of sexuality. Like we have been discussing that the issue of heteronormativity has been put under severe question, and issue of that sexuality is actually in a spectrum, like LGBTQI. Sexuality essentially remains fluid, that a person can naturally be, like heterosexual, bisexual, or asexual, or all sorts of sexuality. So according to this school, sexuality is actually fluid because of, sexuality flows from the natural needs of emotions, emotional support, companionship, and need for intimacy. And so So these theses have been even supported by Michel Foucault, who is a post-structuralist, in his work *The History of Sexuality*. In *History of Sexuality*, Foucault advances a thesis that actually the control of sexuality from the very, ripe ages, from very young ages of both, like children of both sexes, or both sexes, that control of sexuality is mechanism of actually controlling people in their future lives, through various, like laws and other things, like controlling their actions and all. So according to Foucault, this control of sexuality actually leads into, like, various forms of repression, like emotional repression, sexual repression, psychological repressions, which eventually causes the violence to people, and inherent, and kill their inherent creativity, or inherent, innate quality of being humans. So sexuality is fluid, it's not given, or it's there is nothing of sorts of heterosexual norms or heteronormativity, and it is actually a cultural construct not given in biology. So even then some debates are also, or some issues are put up, that which question that say sanity of, LGBTQ people, or that maybe they have some sort of mental disorder, or that they are in a confused state, that they do not know what is what. No, but that is not the case. So it is not in biology. So these are all baseless, propositions. And some people then also argue that this is more of an, urban phenomena. It's not a rural phenomena. It's an urban phenomena. See, people of different sexualities are found everywhere, in every geographies. The element of it being urban phenomena is that only that the part that the movement, the identity, the gender identity movement is mostly urban phenomena. The expression, the gender expression, and the consciousness and the movement built around it, it's urban phenomena. People in rural areas mostly, like, hide their this identity, or like indulge in the various forms of intimacy away from the public view. They do not come out with their gender identities. That doesn't mean that there are no diverse gender identities, or like diverse forms of sexuality, present in rural areas. Or some accuse it of Western culture. No, that is not the case. So what this LGBTQ phenomena is, it is actually part of the democratization, and it's a question of identity, gender identity, and matters of choice regarding their sexuality. And so the consciousness. So wherever there is democratization, the, mobilization happens around, crystallization of consciousness. So these things then seem to be, coming up in modern era, but they were already there was nothing unnatural natural about it. It is only the movement aspect which is new. And quite recently, right to intimacy has been accepted as a core component of autonomy, right to autonomy, and right to privacy in India, which is a very progressive step for LGBTQ community. So there are two judgments which have effect on this right to intimacy. One is K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, the famous right to privacy judgment of 2017, and the other is Navtej Johar judgment, which is 2018 judgment, which read down the section 377 of IPC, which criminalized, homosexual activities and adultery as well. And so, in Navtej Johar judgment, the Supreme Court actually uh, proclaimed that the manner in which individuals choose to exercise intimacy was beyond legitimate concerns of state. So, these judgments have opened up avenues for recognizing diversity of relationships, intimacies, and families which may not be heterosexual, marital, or biological. So these judgments have just opened up these avenues. They have not crystallized these avenues because this is a sphere of legislature. So rightly, Supreme Court is not stepping on their toes. So with these judgments, LGBTQ people have at least been granted legitimacy in the private sphere. In the private sphere, like where they practice their intimacy, now they are free to do so. But public sphere, in the public sphere, you know, LGBTQ community still face severe socio-political exclusion. This is how, like, let's see how. It is because of the premium that is placed upon the heterosexual couples, right? So let me give you example which might hit closer to your closer to home with every one of us, like the exclusion that people face who are not couples, right? For example, like most of our like student life, like we might have or you guys might have also experienced like issue of being single and all. And then many nice places, my nice bars or restaurants and other places are actually banned for the stag entries and all, like, so you face exclusion there, or we face exclusion there. So this premium that has been placed on heterosexual couples leads to various forms of exclusions. For example, membership of some clubs, like for couple kitties, access to public spaces, and joint accounts in banks and all, like various other civil rights. So the public sphere, the public space, in public spaces, legitimacy of anything other than heterosexual couples, is not awarded by society or by state. So that is why like these gay parades which happen so openly, and people dress in different dresses, they cross dress, they paint their faces, and they express the different signs and symbols of their fluid sexuality and away from the heteronormative sexuality. These parades are movements to gain legitimacy in public sphere. Let us now come to the issue of transgender and surrogacy bills, which are part of the current issues in this sphere. So, the criticism against both these bills is that it reinforces the idea of family as patriarchal, heterosexual and caste-based institution. That is, family based solely on marriage, blood, or adoption. The Nalsa judgment of 2014 uh, ruled in favor of transgenders, and it granted that transgender persons should be awarded the right to equality under Article 14, life and personal liberty, Article 21, and Article 19. So let us see how Transgender Persons Bill 2019 fares in comparison to NALSA judgment of 2014. So the article that I read on the internet, uh, the tagline associated with this was the Transgender Persons Bill 2019, a step closer, a step closer towards denying the right to chosen family. So it denies the right to chosen family. What are the what all are the problematic provisions of this bill? So in this bill, there is lack of self-determination, that a transgender person cannot self-identify themselves as transgender. So they will have to seek certification from the collector office. And uh, and the other criticism against this bill is that there is a lesser punishments in cases of violence against transgender persons, comparison to other arrangements, for example, like normal hetero sexual couple arrangements of domestic violence and all. So this denies them right to equality, and there is lack of reservation in their favor, and there is a conflation of transgender identity with that of persons with intersex variations. So how there is a conflation between the transgender identity with that of the person with intersex variations, because it makes it mandatory for the persons concerned to undergo sex reassignment surgery in order to identify within the male female binary. So what it does is that a person, so you have to still conform to a binary of male and female. So if you claim to have a transgender identity, you will also have to undergo sex reassignment surgery. So what it means is that you cannot cross dress and be in public places. That you cannot have a characteristics of male and still dress up like a female, or a woman in public spaces. So this essentially denies the gender identities to transgender in public spaces. So other things that go against the right to chosen family is that it forces transgender persons to either choose between natal families or between the rehabilitation homes. It doesn't give them choice of living with the families they choose, the network of friends, network of other transgender people. And most often not than not, natal families are sites of spaces of violence, and so it's almost like choice between hell and a hard place. And Bill even doesn't recognize the Hijra households. So Hijra community has seen it as an attack on Hijra households, and move to erase the Hijra culture. So what are Hijra communities? Hijra communities are non-biological forms of kinship in which gurus take on economic and social responsibilities for their chelas, and there are elaborate rules for lineage and descent within Hijra gharanas as well. So this bill recognize doesn't recognize Hijra households. So even other chosen families which are not recognized in law have to resort to various strategies to address this legal vacuum. Like they have to resort to life partner deeds, they have to resort to friendship contracts, because marriages are not recognized in law for these chosen families. The examples are like same-sex couples, and same-sex couples. And the effects, the negative effects of legal vacuum are that it opens room for various forms of exploitation, and it denies them right to equality. And it also perpetuates the stigma around the transgender identity or gender diversity. With the question of institutionalization of live-in partnerships or live-in relationships, so these live-in relationships, which are different from marriages, are also recognized only for heterosexual couples. So it reinforces heteronormativity. So these live-in partners, heterosexual couples, are awarded almost same protection as the institution of marriage in the form of domestic violence and maintenance and all, and which are not provided to other chosen families of same-sex couples. So we can summarize the criticism of transgender bill as follows: that it doesn't provide gender autonomy because the facility of self-identification has not been provided. It reinforces the gender binary because of it has made men mandatory to undergo sex reassignment surgery. It doesn't enable choice because it doesn't recognize the chosen families of hijras or same-sex couples. It denies the right to equality to transgender people with uh, their heterosexual counterparts, and it doesn't even recognize transgender people as vulnerable section, vulnerable because they are subjected to various forms of discrimination, stigmatization, and exploitation because it doesn't even provide any affirmative action for transgender people. And it does nothing to address the stigma attached with transgender people. Let us now come to the Surrogacy Regulation Bill of 2019, and it has been labeled as an exclusivist and casteist law in the making. Of course, like this analysis that we are doing is from the point of view of the feminist scholars, feminist point of view, and uh, actually these perspectives are current in the sociology as a discipline. So this is the era of postmodernism. Postmodernism is the perspective which sort of abandons the romanticism around modernization process, and this is era of critical social science school that is also part of postmodern modernism only. And so the critical school, what it does is it goes to that third layer of the truth, and it sort of opposes the structures of oppression. So yes, surrogacy bill. So this surrogacy bill bans the commercial surrogacy and uncritically adopts the idea of altruistic surrogacy. The rationale being to prevent exploitation of women from poor economic classes. But the activists claim that the bill, rather than addressing the exploitation per se, attacks the work itself. So the feminist scholars see childbearing as reproductive work. This bill, on the other hand, portrays childbearing as a noble cause that women should do not only for their husbands, but also for all eligible close relatives chosen and screened by the state. So this labor of love can easily turn into labor of coercion because uh, many women can be coerced to like undertake surrogacy for the close relatives. So this whole thing, not recognizing reproductive labor and uh, reinforcing the aspect of labor of love, this reinforces the idea of kulbadu. What is kulbadu? That is the duties of a married woman. What are the duties of the married women according to the Brahminical patriarchy? These are like to bear children, do unpaid housework, and the caring responsibilities for the sick and elderly. All these, the caring responsibilities in the family are also fall upon the kulbadu or the married women. And uh, further, by allowing only a close relative to be a surrogate mother, the state promotes casteist notion by trying to preserve the purity of family. This again imposes the ideal of heteronormative family. This bill criminalizes the surrogacy in case of single men, women, live-in partnerships, including same-sex couples and transgender persons. So this bill is not only discriminatory but is violative of right to reproductive autonomy as an aspect of right to privacy guaranteed under the constitution. So it as you can see now, all these things deny the range of civil rights that flow from the marriage to a diverse set of people, be it transgenders, be it hijras, be it same-sex couples. And through this just legitimizing of heteronormative family, many diverse people are denied the institutions through which the basic human need of connection, intimacy, and dependency is realized. But there are some civil silver linings from some Supreme Court judgments which we mentioned earlier, this Puttaswamy and the Navtej Johar and Nalsa judgment as well. And now they have recognized, right to intimacy and right to gender identity and other things in private sphere. But their recognition in public sphere is still a far cry. So this demonstrates aptly that how the nature is circumscribed by culture and how nature is defined by culture. So let me restate the earlier quote from Amsterdam to reinforce my point. The quote begins: "The more nature is assisted by technology and more the social recognition of parenthood is circumscribed by legislation, the more difficult it becomes to think of nature as independent of social intervention." So, the cultural account now reinforces the fact that it is actually culture that circumscribes nature rather than nature circumscribing culture, which was position of formalist school. So, so now the question arises when today's culture, today's 21st century culture, all over the world, and even in India, is dominated by values of individualism, humanism, and matters of choice. Then why not this culture should be reflected in all the laws which have which have bearing on nature. So that's why the social movement of gender identity, feminist movement, women's movement is at play. So this is how you make meaning of these movements, and this is how you argue your case. Now I guess you might be in a place of critically analyzing or critiquing such laws which have social underpinnings. Now I guess you will be able to even differentiate your answer from a GS type answer. We have discussed all the sociological issues around these bills. So this the Amsterdam quote of blurring the lines between nature and culture, technology, how technology is close to culture, and the earlier quote that I have read from Heidegger. Let me state it again for this purpose. The essence of technology is by no means anything technological. What it tries to say is that essence of technology is actually social, it's actually cultural. That technology is the essence is the use that we are putting that technology to, or the motivations which led to invention of that or invention of that technology. So now we will move to the issue of new reproductive technologies and how new reproductive technologies are still further blurring the distinction between biological and social, or nature and culture. we will see now how the various new reproductive technologies or various technologies interact with the culture. We'll first analyze the issue of amniocentesis, or and associated issue of sex selective abortion, associated issue of Demaru states, associated issues of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. These are issues of infant, which were this issue was earlier infanticide, now it is of female feticide. So what all these processes reflects on, it reflects on status of women in society, the aspect of property relations, the aspect issue of dowry, because these things, like dowry and the property going away from the family reduces their status, economic status. That's why people in take the path of feticide, feticide. And also issues of honor, because by rule of hypergamy, if you are if you have a daughter, you are liable to lose status, because you will be associated with someone superior in your status. And you might have also heard of a Haryana village who to which take pride in that they do not have any betis, they have only bahus. That and they kill their betis, because sending their beti to another village will reduce the status of the village, because wife takers are superior than wife givers. So, but all this female feticide and skewed sex ratio has also a latent function, which Professor Dharma Kumar, he was an economist, had predicted. That he stated that this skewed sex ratios might end up enhancing status of women in future, in the marriage market, and many people are also experiencing this, because our generation is a generation of skewed sex ratios, because this process started from 1980s and all. And so many people are finding so there is this lack of the missing women, that where are the women, and people are not able to marry. And this also then raises another issue of human trafficking, because these Demaru states are then importing, poor women from states like Bihar and Bengal, and so all this opens various issues. So other thing is now other technology, reproductive technologies of IVF, in vitro fertilization, and the associated aspect of surrogacy. So this IVF and surrogacy hits at the core of the heteronormativity, that heterosexual couples are no longer necessary to have babies or for procreation, so it can be done away with. But then again, legislation comes as in the form of culture, in limiting such scope, preventing such scope. And because because of availing IVF and surrogacy, even same-sex couples can have babies, or even single mothers can have babies, or even single men can have babies, or transgender people can have babies. But that has been preemptive attack has been done through various legislation, like we had seen with the surrogacy bill. And another issue arising out of IVF and surrogacy can be that presently impotency is a legitimate ground on which divorce can be sought. Now this impotency aspect might lose that legitimacy, because uh, the main motive of procreating can be resorted to technological means. And this aspect can actually find favor with cultural right as well, because cultural right is very much concerned about rise of divorce rates in Indian society. So by not making impotency as a ground for divorce, it might lead to less number of divorce. And then there's another issue of designer babies, that you can gene edit with the tools of gene editing, human genome projects and all. So you can design a baby which is free from diseases, which is free from disabilities, which is free from like cancers and other things, you know, like congenital diseases. And but there are various, you know, moral and social issues, the ethical issues around it, because designer baby can end up, you know, like reducing the diversity of gene pool, which is the diversity of gene pool is very necessary for survival of the race, you know, the human race, so that uh, it can the more diverse the human gene pool is, the more chances that it can survive the various environmental issues. And it will also create the distinction between rich and poor starker, because, you know, like rich will be able to avail this service, and they can have their babies, you know, like with all those racist and fascist sort of, you know, like features, like, you know, like sharp nose, you know, blue eyes, or, you know, like fair color, or, you know, like elongated, or all the skull shapes and other things. So this can create real distinction, you know, like between rich and poor. It might lead to, you know, like rich becoming coming out as, you know, like different species altogether. And then the issue of disability, you know, like what about the now, if the disability can be preempted, what about the people, state of the people who are already disabled? And what about the issue of the disabled are would be predominantly represented by the poor people. And then it will, you know, like even legitimize the rationale of the distinction between poor and rich, that for example, you know, like rich man in castle, poor man at his gates, that god has ordered their estates, like such arguments. So I hope, you know, like now you will be able to deal with all these issues, whatever new even issues come at your, you know, in your way, that you will be able to deal with them effectively. And I hope this lecture have given you like little bit of sociological imagination, because, you know, like this is my contention, and this is will always be my contention, that if your theoretical foundation is strong, the sociological imagination comes automatically. And you can you'll be able to identify the current issues which are relevant to sociology, and you'll be able to apply them effectively as well.